My name is Benton Stokes. I'm a former fundamentalist, post-evangelical worship leader, and songwriter. I enjoy wry Manhattans, roller coasters, and road trips, just not all at the same time.
I'm Elaine O'Rourke, and I'm a teacher, an author, and a spiritual coach. I was a philosophy professor and a liberal pastor in a couple of former lives, and these days, I love aha moments and not-so-dry martinis.
We have conversations about life and God with a queer perspective, over cocktails, like you. This is Cocktail Theology. Today's cocktail is named for a legendary LA restaurant, which sadly is not there anymore.
I know. It broke my heart when they took it down.
Yeah,
I admit this.
This is the Brown Derby. Now, when we were out in Tucson with our friend John Birdsall last year, and you guys had an amazing conversation that we were able to record.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to that interview, you really should.
Yeah, go back and find it. It's a good one. But we made Brown Derbies, and then we didn't talk about it.
We didn't.
And that was a really good Brown Derby. This is an average Brown Derby. And I'm saying average not because I've had a lot of them, and this one's in the mean.
Right.
It's just not as spectacular as the one I remember.
Mean and median. I never remember which one's which on those.
Yeah, I'm not sure
either.
Very
good. All right, I'm going to try it now. All right, so it doesn't have fresh grapefruit.
I think that might be the reason.
But this is still very tasty.
It's definitely better now that it's cold. Like, we made this a couple hours ago and put it in the freezer, and it's definitely better now.
I like this. I would drink this. It's a little sweet for my taste. Surprise. But the flavors all come through, which is nice.
Yeah, so it's bourbon, it's grapefruit juice, and it's honey.
Yeah. And honey syrup, and in our case, condensed grapefruit juice, where it should be fresh grapefruit juice.
Yeah.
Which makes all the difference.
The aromatics alone it'd be a lot brighter if it
hugely.
were fresh.
But I mean, I like it. I think it's a great combination of flavors, basically.
Yeah, it is.
It's very good. And it's a 3-ingredient cocktail, which I asked you for. We've got an interesting thing we're talking about today, and 3-in-1 comes into the whole.
I'm intrigued. Do say more.
So I won't explain the rabbit hole that got me into thinking about Messianic Judaism, but that's what we're talking about today is Messianic Judaism.
Okay.
And I wanted the 3-in-1 cocktail to kind of allude to the Trinity and how the Trinity really is kind of the spoiler in all of this.
Okay, yeah.
All right. So what do you know about this?
I don't know very much. When I was still working in Christian music as a publisher, a songwriter came to see me who was a Messianic worship leader. And so she had written these worship songs that they were using in their worship gatherings. There was a radio show that came on early on Sunday mornings on the local college Christian station. And the DJ during that hour and a half or whatever would play these Jewish sounding songs. I didn't know what they meant. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know where they came from. But I was really into Christian music and I was very curious. And this is when I was in high school. So then when I met her, it sort of harkened back to that. And I'm like, well, let's learn a little more. So she played some of her songs for me, and they were okay, but I didn't really know how to judge whether they were good or not.
Right.
Because, I wasn't going to apply the standard that I was applying to, what was a hit on Christian radio to what she was doing. They were just so different. Right. But everything had this minor haunting sound to it, and get out the show car or whatever that thing is called.
It's a shofar, yes.
Shofar. Anyway, so it was all very unusual to me.
Yeah.
Clearly very earnest about it. Was also speaking Christianese, kind of. So it was very confusing. The whole thing was just really kind of confusing to me, and I think it still is kind of confusing. I don't know, but merging Judaism and Christianity to me seems tricky.
Well, that's one way to put it. Sure. So my first encounter with Messianic Judaism was in an organization called Jews for Jesus. Jews for Jesus is perhaps the most incorrectly named organization of any ever.
Ooh, okay.
Most of its work has been in trying to get Jews to convert to, let's call it Christianity light.
Okay.
And the push has been conversion, and the language that they use is not conversion, but it's clearly conversion language.
Yikes.
So one would be in a subway and see tracts for Jews for Jesus, reaching out to Jews, trying to convince them of the Messiahhood of Jesus. One could argue that that is no different than saying, we really have discovered who the Messiah is and we want to share that with you. However, the distributing of tracts in a subway or in public places tells you immediately what group of people it's coming from.
Yep.
And so immediately your antenna should go up.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that was the first I heard of it. And then later on over the years, I was kind of just paying attention to, even though I'm not Jewish, I care a lot about the people who respond to God in the Jewish tradition. And I'm phrasing it really carefully because I want to emphasize the people.
Right.
And about the tradition itself. I mean, the fact is Christianity was born out of Judaism.
It was.
And I want to suggest to everybody that I'm going to go into this with the idea that Christianity and Judaism are two different things. And what's interesting in that is that it actually, my view of it actually corresponds with the Jewish view of it.
Okay.
Okay? All the major groups of Judaism, all of them, would say that if you believe Jesus is the Messiah, you are not a Jew. Period. End of sentence. Hard stop.
Yeah.
There are lots of reasons for that. Part of it is historical. But part of it is the idea of the Messiah was restoration of Israel as a people.
Yes.
Right? And clearly that hasn't happened.
Right.
So clearly the Messiah hasn't come.
Right.
Okay? Simple. The only people who talk about Jesus as the Messiah and them being Jewish come at it from a very different kind of direction than Jews coming at it would be. Now, early on, first, second century, you have lots of conversion, and we would call it conversion. In fact, the Bible even talks about it kind of as conversion from Judaism to this other thing.
Yes.
And early on, the name for the other thing wasn't really clear. But let's call it Judaism into Jesus following.
Yeah.
You get all of these fights between Peter and Paul about what Jews should have to do in order to become Jesus followers, and then what Gentiles who are becoming Jesus followers need to do. Right? So the early argument was, do Gentiles need to become Jews before they can be Jesus followers?
Right. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Notice that.
Yes.
That's a very specific kind of way of thinking about who Jesus is.
It is.
And that all disappears pretty quickly. So as we're talking about, and I want to put just big quotes around this, Messianic Judaism, we're talking about at least three different kinds of things.
Okay.
The first one is people who have been brought up Jewish, think in terms of Torah, Talmud, Jewish tradition, and say to themselves, you know what? Maybe Jesus was the Messiah, and maybe we've misunderstood what Messiah would be. Now, there's lots of problems in that, but there's that whole understanding that maybe they have come to understand something that is completely in line with what they've been doing, but bends away from what everybody else thinks.
Okay.
Make sense? The second version of this, to my mind, is what seems to be the main thrust of, again, scare quotes, Messianic Judaism, which is, it really kind of came to fruition around the 1960s. It's evangelicals or evangelical Protestants claiming Jewish tradition, Jewish structures, reclaiming the law as important. Like this, it's kind of like taking this sense of the Old Testament and reaccepting it as Jewish, as opposed to saying we've replaced it. Because remember, evangelicalism has had this idea that Christians replace Jews.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't do that. It says instead, well, we have this connection, and maybe what they're doing is the right thing. We just have gotten far. But it's coming from a very Christian lens.
Yeah.
Okay? So it's reading Christianity back into the Old Testament. Sound familiar?
Yes.
Okay? There's another thread that is really more about Christians caring about what happens to the state of Israel because their understanding of the apocalypse or Jesus' returning depends upon what happens to the state of Israel.
Right. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So we're just going to set those people aside because that's just,
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with faith. It has
Right.
only to do with all the other things. So the people in the middle are the ones who are interesting to us. So you've got the people who wanted to reincorporate Jewish tradition, Jewish understanding, like want to kind of reclaim that history and form it into their own way of practicing faith. Mm-hmm. Okay. Not sure how I feel about it, but okay. It's kind of like when we lead the Maundy Thursday service, we try to talk about how this might have been read by Jewish people at the time. Like if they were sitting there talking to Jesus, what they might have, how they might have seen the symbolism.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So there's that possibility.
And then there are those, evangelical churches that do that do something like a Seder during Holy Week.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And oh my gosh. Okay, thank you for bringing that up. Because you've got the evangelical churches that do things like act out a Seder, and they do a Seder, and they wear clothes that people wouldn't have, but we like to pretend they would have worn.
Bathrobes.
You know what I mean? It becomes this play.
It becomes a play.
Right?
Yeah.
But they're doing what is now the modern Seder. Whole other conversation. And it really is like a play.
Yeah, it really is. It's like when you go to one of those murder mystery dinners and everybody's a character.
Who murdered Jesus? Okay, so there's that, right?
Right.
But I think that there's something in there. Here's the problem that I have with all of this. I'm going to be really honest with y'all, with you and with everybody else. Mm-hmm. I like to know what the edges of things are. Mm-hmm. Now, I blow through edges of things just sort of on routine, but I like to know it.
I like to know what it
I like to know
is.
it. So, like if I run through a stop sign, which I've never done, or at least, no, I don't think I've ever done, like just blown through it. If the cop pulls me over, I want to know there was a stop sign. You know what I mean? And then I can say, yes, I did. Heck to you, right? So I like to know what the edges are. Mm-hmm. And the problem that I have with that middle group of Messianic Jews is I don't know what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether what they're trying to do is honor and experience the fact that Christianity was born of Judaism, and so there must be something good in this that may inform their Christianity. Mm-hmm. Totally great with that.
Yeah.
But then you're not a Messianic Jew. You're a Christian who likes Jewish tradition.
Yeah, right.
Calling yourself a Jew is a bit like my calling myself a black person.
Right, it is.
And I have a little trouble with that.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know me, my daughter, who is multiracial, laughs at my whiteness on a regular basis. So trust me that would be an inaccurate statement. But there's something appropriative in that just really makes me itch.
Well, yeah, because like when I think of the Jewish people, and that by itself is like saying the gay community. I mean, well, what is that? The Jewish people, there's history, yes. There's culture, there's food,
there's persecution,
and yes, and so there's all of this that make it's not just co-opting the Old Testament mm-hmm. as well because I believe that and I'm trying to read it like a Jewish person.
Right.
It makes me a Jew that loves Jesus. I don't
Yeah, I'm going to blow the shofar, so now I'm Jewish.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So, yes, I completely agree with you. That's an incredibly diminishing view of what Judaism is and what those people have been through.
Yeah. So let's set aside the evangelicals who've decided they want to be Jewish without actually becoming Jewish and
Right.
like being part of a Jewish worldview. And don't talk to me about first century worldviews. Oh my gosh.
So done with that.
Like there's a first century worldview. Anyway, again, it's such a colonialist Christian way of thinking. It just makes me insane. All right, I'm fine. So what I'd like to do, rather than trying to rescue the Messianic Jews from their own arrogance, what I'd like to instead at this point is to say, okay, well, let's for a moment understand that we are Gentile Christians or Gentile Jesus followers, whatever you want to do with that. What would it mean, without talking to Jews about this, because notice I'm just ignoring them for the moment.
Yeah.
What would it mean for us to honor the fact that the faith we have come to has come through the roots of this Jewish story, the story of Israel, the story of the people of Mesopotamia? That story we have adopted and, in our understanding, been adopted into.
Yes.
What would it mean to honor that? That's an interesting question to me. What would it mean to be I don't even have the right words. You wouldn't be a Jewish Christian because you're not but a Christian who honors the roots of their faith. Like, what would that look like? To me, that's an interesting question for those of us who try to follow Jesus and understand that we are not historically, genetically, anything, culturally Jewish. That if we adopt the movement of Jewish tradition without becoming a part of a synagogue, taking on that life, choosing to not accept Jesus, without doing that, we're not Jews.
Right.
So how do we think about diving into Judaism so that we understand and get a sense and get a feel in our own hearts about where this all comes from, and gain some care that we are not brought up to have? I mean, it's all the things.
Right.
What does that look like?
Yeah. I think it might start with simply reading the Bible differently. In one of the courses that you teach, Reading the Bible as If It Matters, we understand that you can't read the book of Acts the same way you read the book of Jeremiah.
Right.
They're written for different audiences. They're written for different reasons, from different perspectives, in different time frames,
Right.
reflecting different things. I think if we strive to read, for instance, the Pentateuch as the Pentateuch, which means understanding the myth in it, which
Right.
means trying to understand everything that's going on.
Right.
And even, supplementing that with some Jewish commentary and some other things that would help give us a new lens through which to read those books, and not just keep reading Jesus into everything
Right.
that's going on in the Old Testament, but allow the Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, to be what they are.
Right.
Try to learn from them and appreciate them for what they are, and gain from them what we can, because there's a lot there that we can gain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a good place to start.
Okay.
I've learned a lot over the last few years just in approaching the Old Testament that way. And again, not trying to read this prophecy and see Jesus. Now, obviously, in the New Testament, there are places where the Old Testament, where the Hebrew scriptures are quoted, where they
Yes.
are applied to situations, which would only be right because these are Jewish people. They're sharing what they know and applying it to a situation that they're confronting.
Right.
So it makes total sense that that's why we would do that. But then now, all these years later, we apply, because we know the end of the story, now we apply all of that we read all of that into
Right. Or we think we know the end of the story.
Right. We think we know.
Yeah.
And so we apply all that, and then that really does an injustice to learning what the scriptures actually would have for us if we just read them differently.
Yes, that's a great way of thinking about it. I like that a lot. Yeah, for me, I think growing up around, I grew up in the LA area, and at a time, particularly when it was much more, I don't want to say it was more Jewish, but let's say there were more Orthodox Jews living in community in the areas that I grew up.
Yeah.
Which creates a different structure of things.
Right.
You can avoid it, frankly, but if you're paying attention, that's a whole different set of people doing a whole different set of life.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
So I think that I had the joy and opportunity to know lots of Jewish folks who weren't being actively Christianized all the time, right? Mm-hmm. But I think as an adult, besides reading Jewish commentary on scripture, reading the books of Chaim Potok, who wrote mostly fiction, but also wrote history, and wrote it from the position of the conflict between more mainstream Judaism and Hasidism, helped me understand more from the inside what people experience, because I was reading his version of their experience rather than somebody from kind of my position going, and here's what they're saying.
Oh, sure.
But it made me go, oh, okay, I can see better, not perfectly, but better what these people in their context as Jews are experiencing, because he's painting their world for me from the inside.
From the inside, right.
It's kind of like, if I want to know about black people, I don't read a white person talking about black people.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, right.
I think that there's something in that can be really helpful if you go in and say, I know nothing. Mm-hmm. I want to know people I don't have the experience of actually spending much time with. I'm good to just spend time with them in this way. I mean, we can go on this forever, but as dominant culture, as white middle class to upper middle class Christians in this culture, we are not required to know anybody else.
It's true.
But everybody below, and I'm using that in big scare quotes, below us, know us really well, because all you've got to do is watch TV and you know us.
Yeah.
So I think there's something about being humble and saying, I really don't know what it's like to be this person, or what it's like to live in this community and look outward, that can help us gain some tiny bit of humility and some tiny bit of insight into experience that isn't ours, which is not Messianic Judaism.
No. Wow. Yeah, humility. That's a big missing piece in all of this, I think. Humility. A little bit goes a long way.
Yeah.
Listeners, we love hearing from you. If you have a perspective on this, if you happen to be Jewish, we would love to hear from you.
Please.
If you have thoughts on this, we are at cocktailtheology.com. We always welcome your comments, your questions, your ideas for episodes and for cocktails. So please do reach out. Till next time.
Funny how the view can change, how life just seems to rearrange itself, no matter what it was. I don't know how it goes, but look, moving on feels pretty good. Moving on feels pretty good.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like and hit subscribe wherever you're listening right now. We welcome your comments, questions, and ideas for conversations and for cocktails. Please get in touch with us at our website, cocktailtheology.com. Cocktail Theology is a production of SFS. Our theme song is Moving On Feels Pretty Good, recorded by yours truly, Benton Stokes. You can find my music wherever you stream your favorite artists. Join us next Thursday for another new episode.